And at the end of it, we got as close as we could to the convention center, and we burned the flag. And we said, red, white, and blue, we spit on you. You stand for plunder. You will go under. I was arrested. I was tried and convicted and sentenced to a year in jail, a $2,000 fine. I appealed the conviction, and that was the beginning of a 5-year court battle all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Good morning. I'm here with Gregory Joey Johnson, who has seen his share of free speech civil rights litigation. Mr. Johnson was the defendant in the 1989 case of Texas v. Johnson, where a 6-year legal battle concluded in a 5-4 Supreme Court decision declaring flag burning to be a form of symbolic speech that could not be banned by the state of Texas. Mr. Johnson would later join a chorus of protesters on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, where he would be arrested again, and another 5-4 Supreme Court decision in U.S. v. Eichman in 1990 held that flag burning is protected free speech that cannot be banned by the United States. Recently, Mr. Johnson was arrested just after igniting a flag in protest at the Republican National Convention in Cleveland in 2016, an arrest that led to a civil rights lawsuit that Cleveland attorneys settled for a reported $225,000. Links to our video discussing that case in the description below. Now, Gregory Joey Johnson has announced a July 4th, 2019 protest at an undisclosed location in Washington, D.C. in a 4-minute video released on YouTube and tagged with hashtag July4BurnFlag. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
So tell us a bit about what happened back in 1984.
In 1984, I went to protest in Dallas, Texas, where the Republican National Convention was. Eichman had put great emphasis on internationalism, on standing with the people of the world, as I mentioned earlier, and on this orientation that the whole world comes first. Dallas was laid out like a modern Nuremberg rally with American flags all over the place. And, these conventions are very deliberately choreographed. And the whole theme of the Republican National Convention, the RNC in Dallas, was new patriotism, bringing back America prouder, stronger, greater. So there were flags draped everywhere, and we did a very defiant march through Dallas. And at the end of it, we got as close as we could to the convention center, and we burned the flag. And we said, red, white, and blue, we spit on you. You stand for plunder. You will go under. And I was arrested. I was tried and convicted and sentenced to a year in jail, a $2,000 fine. I appealed the conviction, and that was the beginning of a 5-year court battle all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was just that, a battle.
And that was the first time that the courts had established, especially the Supreme Court, had established that flag burning was symbolic freedom of speech.
It was the first time that there was a definitive ruling. If you go back and you look at the case history, you see in the 1960s, people were doing all kinds of things with the flag. They were sewing it as a patch on the seat of their pants. They were attaching peace symbols to it and flying it outside their dormitories. They were burning it. There's a case in New York, Street versus New York, where a man named Street went out into the street, a black man, a veteran, and burned the American flag after the murder of a civil rights leader in the South. And his words were, "We don't need this damn flag. We don't need this damn country." And then he burned the flag. And he was arrested, and his case was going through the courts. But they couldn't actually determine, was he arrested for his speech, his actual speech, or was he arrested for his symbolic speech? So the case was thrown out. There have been these kind of precursors or test cases.
Right.
Mine was the first where there was a definitive ruling. We live in an imperialist country.
Mm-hmm.
It's parasitically and predatory. It has 700 military bases scattered around the world. It has a whole global system of exploitation and wealth extraction going on. It's backed up by military armadas, and there's millions and hundreds of millions of lives that are impacted by this on a daily basis, and billions of people in the world that suffer unnecessarily because of it. And so this whole thing that they throw at me about, you shouldn't do this, it harms the veterans, you should thank them for their service. So I say, let's talk about their service. What are they actually doing in the world? They're being played, they're being used to wage wars of empire, wars of conquest, to carry out mass murders. I mean, you know, this is the United States of atrocities, as far as I'm concerned, and the United States of amnesia at one and the same. There's a million people that died in just the Iraq War alone. The series of wars, the series of sanctions and wars that the U.S. prosecuted against the people of Iraq, and it's like, what? That's so 15 minutes ago, you know.
Yeah.
People thinking about it, and understanding the consequences of empire. So it's been said. I've heard from different international friends. Why is it that people that live in the belly of the empire are sometimes the last to know it's an empire, and it's doing these horrific things? So this is something that the flag burning is a dramatic way to bring it to people's attention. If someone has that much disgust, that much contempt for the symbol of the country, they're trying to say something. And the reason I think there's been repeated attempts to suppress it is because they don't want people to hear that kind of a message. They just want it to be Johnny Jingo, you know, when Johnny comes marching home, kind of a jingoistic message about it, expressing disgust or outrage against it, against these crimes of empire. The white phosphorus, the Abu Ghraib, the massacres of civilians, the night raids in the villages in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Somalia, and a whole arc of countries in Pakistan, a whole arc of countries across the Middle East where people have been bombed, invaded, tortured, occupied. People need to know about this and need to stop it. So that's what I'm about. And I'm part of a movement for an actual revolution, not just to express disgust with America, but to build to the time when millions of people would soon put everything on the line to get rid of this system, to overthrow this system and its forces of repression, and bring into being a whole different society. And that's outlined in this book right here, The Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America. There's a draft, a proposal already on the table about how society could be radically different. We don't have to live in a world where this lopsidedness of the world, where a handful of countries and a handful of people within those countries, like there's 43 billionaires in the world that control more wealth than the bottom half of humanity, 3.5 billion people. And somehow that's the natural order of things. Like people used to think slavery was the natural order of things. Well, certainly a lot of the slaves didn't think that way, but you get my point. When you have a society that's divided into classes, you have to understand that democracy, you have to say, well, which class? Because democracy, going back to the Greek, means democracy, ruled by the people. But if you have a society divided into classes, you got to say what people. And in this society, it's clearly the capitalists and the imperialists that are ruling, have disproportionate influence over the wealth of society and over the political institutions, over the media, etc.
So after the Supreme Court decision in 1989, it appears there was a act of Congress. The Flag Protection Act went into effect at midnight, 28 October 1989. You were somehow arrested only 2 days later. What happened there?
Well, we saw the need to immediately defy the Flag Protection Act, this new federal statute that had been enacted and been sponsored by, take note, Joe Biden. So this suppression of flag burning as an expression of contempt for the government, it's like a quintessential form of political dissent. I mean, the whole thrust and purpose of the First Amendment really means nothing without protection of the right to dissent against the government, political speech against the government. And flag burning is a concentrated form of that. But there's been bipartisan efforts to suppress it ever since my case. And we're talking Republicans and Democrats. And George Herbert Walker Bush called for a constitutional amendment in response to the decision in my case, which shocked and outraged a lot and alienated a lot of people. They thought, whether you want to burn it, whether you want to waive it, but don't amend the Constitution. For many people, that's like a secular version of amending the Bible. So here comes Biden with this new federal statute. And there's no getting around the fact that it would be in contradiction to the First Amendment, that it would be political suppression. I went to the U.S. Capitol with 3 other people, including one of them was a Vietnam veteran, and Dred Scott, the artist from Chicago, who did the extremely powerful and controversial art installation called "What is the Proper Way to Display the American Flag," in which he had an American flag on the floor, and then he had a podium on a stand where you could step onto the flag if you so desired and write what you thought was the proper way to display the flag. And then he had on the wall pictures of people in places like South Korea, Panama, what have you, burning the American flag or otherwise desecrating it, as they call it. And so those 2 people were with me. Another artist was with us, and we burned the steps on the flag on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, and that resulted it was what he called put on a fast track to the Supreme Court. And so there was a ruling several months later, and then some folks also burned the flag out in Seattle at the post office. And so those 2 cases were combined and before the Supreme Court.
Now, you were arrested, but you were not charged.
Right, exactly.
How did that make you feel?
I was outraged.
You wanted to be.
I was outraged because I went there, I burned it, but they claimed my flag wasn't burnt enough. It's just ridiculous. I think they didn't want to go back to the Supreme Court with the same flag and the
same name.
Same name, exactly.
That's
too obvious. So they left me out. I didn't do any of this for convenience or for. I did it because of the stakes. I mean, you have to understand it's not about what I'm going to go through as a person. It's what humanity is going through. I mean, what are the real consequences of the world the way it is, and the U.S.'s role as the largest empire in the history of humanity, and they're horrific, and it's unnecessary. The starvation in the world, the famines, the wars for empire, the destruction of the global environment, which I guess I should add, the largest institutional consumer of petroleum in the world is the U.S. military, as part of enforcing this whole global exploitation and oppression. So I don't know. I thought that they were trying to take away the ruling in my case. That's obvious. That was the expressed or the explicit reason for doing this new federal statute. So it cried out to be defied. My decision is not something that the different ruling elites in this country have ever accepted. They've always chafed at it and done work to try to disrupt it or to overturn it with either a constitutional amendment, which has come very close several times, or with a new statute.
Here comes the Republican National Convention to Cleveland in 2016, and you were protesting with a flag burning there again, but you ended up being arrested. What was supposed to happen? Did you think you were going to get arrested, or what was supposed to happen?
Well, I thought there was definitely the possibility of it, because number one, the whole atmosphere around the RNC in Cleveland in 2016 was one of extreme belligerence and American chauvinism. Trump is the embodiment of that. Of misogyny, of jingoism, of xenophobia, extreme xenophobia, the scapegoating of immigrants, just calling them criminals and rapists, and all that ugliness was on show at the RNC in Cleveland in 2016. was being spewed out to the people of the world. You know, these conventions aren't just American affairs. You know, they're broadcast globally. People see them. What happened was, even though they were notified 2 days prior that I was the person, the named defendant, Texas versus Johnson, a landmark Supreme Court case that said we had the right to do exactly what I was about to do, they still came charging in with fire extinguishers and chokeholds. There's a photo of me being taken down in a chokehold. And then 16 of us were brutally arrested and taken to jail. And it took more than a year and a half to get the charges dropped against everyone. And it involved an evidentiary hearing in a misdemeanor case, which is unusual, an evidentiary hearing that involved the chief of police being put on the witness stand and another police commander, and them clearly contradicting each other. So this is what I think the city of Cleveland was fearful of coming out, the case had actually gone to trial, the civil case. So that's just why they settled for a substantial amount, nearly $250,000. And this is an indication of kind of what time it is. And you know, look, Trump is fascist. He's fascist, and I don't say that as a pejorative. I say that as a statement of fact. It's not hyperbole. It's what he actually represents. He's surrounded by people who are all about bringing into being a fascist form of rule in this country, and that's what they've done. And they're well on their way to consolidating. And what we need actually is for millions of people to get out in the streets. I actually like what the people in Hong Kong are doing. It's righteous what they're doing to stand up against the Chinese phony communist regime and its threat to do extradition of people within Hong Kong into mainland China. I think the millions of people that have gone out into the streets in Hong Kong is a beautiful thing, and we should learn from it here.
What is it that prevents the American people from joining the Hong Kong style protests?
Well, ironically, I actually think it's connected with this thing I've been saying about the dangers of American chauvinism, that somehow America is this special place. It has this whole democratic tradition and values, and
it doesn't happen here.
Fascism couldn't happen here. So it's illusions, the same illusions that people have to think that whatever America does in the world, it does it with good intentions. You know, lead them to think that fascism couldn't happen here. Really? You know, in a country that was based upon slavery, you know, for several centuries, a country that was based upon white supremacy, male supremacy, you know, the theft of half of Mexico, you know, Jim Crow segregation, 5,000 lynchings. It can't happen here. You know, society can be convulsed backward, extremely backward, and the consequences of it. And this is, you know, look, Trump is bringing out tanks on the 4th of July, you know, for Washington, D.C. For people who think that, you know, he's like, we have these great tanks, you know. Yeah, and they want to show them, you know, they want to show them to the world. This is the kind of thing that happens in countries where coups d'etats are about to come about. And as Michael Cohen, his attorney, said, if he loses the next election, he doesn't think he's going to respect the outcome. I mean, this is a really dangerous time. So instead of people just humoring themselves or laughing about it or making cynical jokes about it, they need to take it seriously, the direction that society is going in at a very rapid clip, and get out there and oppose it, and get out there and determine to stop it, and say you're not going to live this way. You refuse to live in a country where immigrants are being put in cages, you know, like dog cages, where, you know, a father and his daughter are washing up on the shore of the Rio Grande, you know, having drowned to death. You know, you're not going to stand for that. This is all being done in your name. You know, I think the flag burning is a way to make a concentrated statement of condemnation. As I told the Washington Examiner, I don't do this on a whim. It's a serious condemnation of the system. If it wasn't so effective, I don't think there'd be so many attempts to ban it and to suppress it. And this July 4th in particular the Revolution Club has put out a challenge. It's called July 4th, 2019. Imagine a world without America, a call to act. And it's from the National Revolution Tour and the Revolution Club. And people can find out more about it at the website revcom.us. But we are saying, I'll just share some of it with you. As we approach July 4th, 2019, when the American flag flies over concentration camps on the border, where children cry and even die, when the same bloody rag blesses the bombs and planes and troops that have murdered and mangled hundreds of thousands of children in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and dozens more countries in just the past decade, when it flies over the pins of mass incarceration and over 2 million people, mostly Black, Latino, or Native American, and it's sewn as a shoulder patch on the arms of the murdering police who send them there if the pigs don't kill these youth first, when it's pasted on the derricks that drill into the earth and destroy the environment, when it sits on the lapels of the legislatures who rip from women the right to control their own bodies, when it is waved by the shameless fascist Jack who struts as president and plans to bray and grunt a speech that day in Washington, D.C., we echo the words of Frederick Douglass and say, barbarity and hypocrisy, truer words were never spoken, whether back then, today, or all through U.S. history. And we'll call it on people not just to conceive of it or to imagine of it, but to actively work for it, to find out about the revolution, and to take a stand on the 4th of July, to stand with the people of the world and to burn a flag where you're at or in some other way desecrate it, and make sure you share it on Twitter at Tune Into RevCom. Traditionally, the 4th of July has been this nonpartisan celebration. Presidents don't speak at it. Not that I was into it then, because the U.S. was still an empire, imperialist country then. But my point is, though, is he's taken it to a whole nother level. He's arrogated the holiday to himself and made it about his political campaign and his fascist campaign in society overall. The whole point about bringing out the tanks and putting them on display and having flyovers with the Air Force One and fighter jets. This is all about creating an atmosphere. If this was happening in some other country, people would be alarmed and say this was like a naked display of militarism. Once again, people got to break out of the paralysis of thinking somebody up there, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders or whoever, is going to ride in like on a stallion, on a white stallion, and rescue us. They're not. They're locked into the
just like Obama did, right?
Exactly. No, was a representative of empire as well. You know, they called him the deporter in chief. He was the drone bomber in chief. He did nothing about mass incarceration. When the Black people rose up against the murder of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, he called them thugs. He didn't call the police that murdered Freddie Gray thugs. He called the Black youth thugs. So yeah, just like Obama did. So anyways, I think it's important to say all that, to challenge people. There's risk involved in what we're doing here tomorrow. There's fascists that have come to Washington, D.C., you know. There's white supremacists that have come here. And there is danger, there is risk involved. But we have to put humanity first. We have to act on what we understand and do it with conviction.
Well, it has been very nice to speak to you today, Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
You are a part of free speech history, and we are honored to be able to interview you today. We wish you a safe and a happy 4th of July protest in your case, and we hope that no one has to spend the night in jail or worse, if that's a proper send-off for a protest.
Okay.
So, but thank you again, and wish you the best to you and yours, of course.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.